Hi, I'm Barry Shaw. Welcome to The View from Israel. From time to time, we give you stories of people living what seemingly ordinary lives, but with extraordinary life experiences. And today we have one of those, and I want to welcome Jenny Milgrom. Jenny, welcome to The View from Israel.
Thank you so much. It's absolutely wonderful to be here today.
Great. Okay. Jenny, you were born in Cuba, in a Catholic family in Cuba, and then your family moved from Cuba into Florida.
That is correct. I was 4 years old when my family left in 1960, and we lived in Florida. I was born into a Cuban Catholic family, and my grandparents and the family was all from Spain.
Okay. And then you grew up, you studied, you married a nice Catholic guy, and then you had a couple of kids.
A nice Catholic elementary school in Miami. I went to a nice Catholic high school. I went to a great women's Catholic university. And then I married a Catholic Cuban man and had 2 beautiful children.
Right. But then something strange happened to you while this was going on.
Correct. But something strange happened to me all along from the time I was very young. I just didn't feel that I belonged to that particular, let's say, culture or family. Inside, something was wrong. Even though I was in a Catholic environment and I was very religious, I still had a problem with what I was feeling inside, was that I was not a part of them. And it wasn't until I reached the university level and I really was able to study and understand comparative religions that I was able to see that really there was something that wasn't right inside. It was nothing that anyone could see, nothing that I could explain, but it was inside me that I felt it was not correct.
So you were sort of like, were feeling uncomfortable in your own skin. And go ahead.
No, the whole time, since a little girl, I was feeling uncomfortable. I struggled a lot with the dogma of the Catholic religion. When you are in a Catholic school, it's like any other religious school. You don't just, it's not just going to a service once a week. You're learning religion day in, day out, day in, day out. And I just felt there was something wrong. I felt that I didn't believe a lot of what was going on, but I didn't understand because I was too young and there was nobody I could ask at all. I couldn't ask the teachers, the nuns, the priests. I would ask and I would be punished and I'd have to study more. So basically it was just a feeling, always a feeling of being, let's say, alone and not belonging. It was a feeling more of that, of not belonging.
But was it then a feeling of really you preferred living a secular life rather than a religious life?
No, it wasn't about that because I have always been very spiritual and I am very ritualistic. So I enjoyed the ritual. I enjoyed all the, let's say, pomp and circumstance of being involved with the church and the incense and all of this kind of ritual. I was not looking for secularity, let's say. I was okay being religious because I've always been close to God, but it was more about not understanding the dogma to be correct, let's say. Just it should be something else.
What was then the trigger that pointed you in a specific direction that changed your life?
I believe that the trigger, I had a trigger at a very young age with a little girl I went to camp with who taught me about the Jewish religion. Believe it or not, maybe I was 6 or 7 years old. Her name was Friedman. I've never met up with her again. And with all the social media, I never saw her again or never heard from her again. But for several years in a row in this camp, she taught me a lot about the Jewish religion and about keeping kosher, and we were just very young children. But the biggest trigger was at the university where the nuns were teaching me about the Jewish religion. And it's Barry University in Miami, which is an incredibly good Jewish school. And the nun that was teaching me most, later I learned that she single-handedly collected money for the Holocaust Memorial that is in Miami Beach. And it was from her that I learned most of the basis for Judaism and the base of what was later to follow my path towards Judaism. However, I was young, I got married very young, and I had children right away. So it was not possible when you're a young mother and married and working to be able to start pursuing, let's say, a religious, looking for something else. So I baptized my children. They were in a Catholic religion as well. I did not take them off into church, but I did make sure they had their Catholic rituals. And then at about the age of 28 or so, I started really pursuing again what I was feeling inside, that I was very uncomfortable with the Catholic religion, and my starting to learn and study and pursue the Jewish pursuits, I would say, is what eventually led to my being separated and then divorced from my husband.
Because by that time, I guess the poor guy had this crazy wife who was pursuing Judaism to the point that you were thinking of maybe even converting at that time. And
Right.
it was something that really went against the grain about his upbringing and the upbringing, the traditional upbringing that he wanted for his family and his kids in particular. So that must have been a very uncomfortable
Absolutely.
stage in your life.
Absolutely, I was the crazy wife. Absolutely. I mean, here, you get married to someone and you start growing up together, and then all of a sudden, one person is hiding Jewish books under the bed, which is what I was doing. So the reality is that I started going off in a totally different direction. I finally, when I was on my own, it wasn't simple because now I was on my own and I had a 3-year-old daughter, and I had my son, I believe, was 14 or 15. And then I was really, as a single mom, it was harder, but I was able to start my Jewish, and I started to study and learn, and I started going to a Reconstructionist temple, then I went to a Reformed temple, then I went to a conservative synagogue, and at each stage I stayed several months, but it wasn't until I hit a traditional little shtibel in an old house in Miami that I found a rabbi that really, to me, having been brought up with so many rules and regulations and always being such a strict part of the Catholic religion. So here I felt that for me, uh, converting Orthodox was really the way to go. I'm a person that likes that kind of way to go, one and one. It took me many, many, many years of study, 4.5, 5 years. I did not convert my children. I felt two things. I felt it wasn't right for me to do that. They had been born into a certain way of life, and just because my soul was yelling at me and reaching out to me to do something different, I didn't think that I should be the one to disrupt the lives of my children. And also, my ex husband had put in the divorce papers that I could not convert my children. And I did not try to bring them to my side, let's say. I converted. It became even harder. The house became kosher. I had my children couldn't eat what they were eating before. I couldn't eat at the home of my mother. It became a very difficult. And if I was alone before, the path now was even more solitary. There was no one to really talk to. I was by myself. I had lost all of my friends from before. I lost everyone that I ever loved, and my family was talking to me, but it wasn't, and it's never easy for a child to convert to another religion. But I felt so strongly that I went that path. And then a couple of years after that, I met my husband, Michael, which really he changed my life because He was my beshert, like we say, he was my soulmate. So meeting Michael was really something that happened a couple of years afterwards, and it was really a huge blessing for me
And I
to
understand that Michael was an Orthodox Jew from where
Michael
originally?
was Michael was living in Antwerp. He comes from a Hasidic family. So he comes from a family of very strict, let's say, Hasidic Jews from originally from Romania that settled in Israel in 1948. At the beginning, they left Romania and finally settled in Israel. And Michael, when I met him, was living in Antwerp. And Antwerp, they have a very strong Jewish ghetto. So I think it was a big leap of faith also for Michael to come and be with someone like me that had come from a Catholic background. So I think for both of us, it was a huge leap of faith. And but here we are, 27 years later, and we're still leaping, but not about faith.
So, how do you get together? Because there you are in Florida. He's from Antwerp, and how the connection?
Well, the connection was that Michael happened to be my largest competitor in my pharmaceutical business. So he also had a pharmaceutical business. I had one in Miami with my family, and Michael had one in Antwerp. So on a business trip to Santiago, Chile, I heard his name being called. I knew of him as my competition. And as life would have it, he was visiting my very same client on the very same moment and the very same day. So it was really like a match made in heaven, but it was really made in the waiting room of a laboratory in Santiago, Chile. And we got together so I could really, that night we got together, I wanted to tell him to get out of my market because he didn't even speak Spanish. I don't understand what he was doing there. But instead of, we fell in love. And it took a little while, and finally he moved to Miami, left his business in Antwerp, and for this past many years has been running back and forth. But it was a transition for him as well to leave a ghetto and to come to the suburbs, let's say, in Miami, Florida.
Right. Well, being Orthodox Jew, it has a lot of blessings, but it has a lot of restrictions. For instance, on the Shabbat, on the Saturday, you can't travel and things like this. But I want to come on to a point, a really significant and amazing starting point in your life. Your grandmother died. Tell us about that story.
Correct. My grandmother died on a Friday morning. And I am Sabbath observant. And as you said, with all the restrictions that come, we don't drive in cars, we don't go out, we walk wherever we're going. We live in a community of people that we are friends with, and everybody's walking to each other. So on that Friday morning when my grandmother died, I didn't even worry that it was a Sabbath because after all, my family was Cuban, they were Catholic. Normally, it takes days and days and days to bury someone. So when I got to my grandmother's house, she was still there. And my mom says, "We have to bury her immediately." And I'm like, "Really, Mom? Seriously? Immediately? It's going to be Friday night. You know, I observe the Sabbath." And she told me, "Well, in our family, we have to bury within hours." And I said, "Look, I really don't understand that because let's do it this Monday. I know you can't do it Sunday because of the church laws, but do it Monday." "No, it has to be immediately. And if you don't come, I'm never going to talk to you again." Well, she wasn't talking to me that much anyway, because we had a very civil but very strained relationship. And I spoke to my rabbi to go to the funeral. And my rabbi told me that I could spend the night in the funeral home. And it was just something, it was not feasible. I stayed home. I was very sad. I had been very close to my grandmother, and they had the funeral, and it went on without me, which really was one.
I want to point out to our listeners, our viewers here, that in fact, I should quite rightly say, the Catholics usually have a wake and it takes them some time before they bury the dead, but actually in the Jewish religion, it has to be done within 24 hours, virtually the same day. And yet here you have your Catholic mother telling you she has to be buried quickly.
Correct. So the next day, I had gone to synagogue on Saturday morning. I was in my house with all of my friends that came to be with me. And my mother comes about 1 o'clock in the afternoon with a little box, and she puts it on the table and tells me, "Your grandmother wanted me to give this to you on the day of her death." And then she walked out of the house. And inside the box was some Star of David earrings and a pendant that was a hamsa, which is the hand of God, which is a Jewish symbol, as well as being a symbol for other religions. But it was definitely, along with the Star of David earrings, I took it to be that my grandmother was acknowledging something to me because she knew I had converted. And during my whole conversion process, instead of telling me, you shouldn't do this or anything, my grandmother was always telling me, this is very dangerous what you're doing. Very, very, very dangerous. And I always thought that she meant that it was dangerous for my soul. I was going to fry in hell, which is more the Catholic viewpoint. But I think what she was trying to tell me all along in those 4 or 5 years was that it was dangerous to be a Jew. Because as the story will unfold, my grandmother had taught me many customs that I was taking to be as family tradition. She taught me many customs that ended up being Jewish customs, which are things like checking the eggs for blood, checking the vegetables before cooking them, any leafy greens we check, because for us, we cannot eat any kind of an insect. So we have to check all of the vegetables to make sure they are fully, fully, fully clean. She taught me one of the most important of the Jewish traditions, which I didn't know at the time, and that is that when we make large amounts of recipes, we'll have about 2.5 kilos or 5 pounds of flour. We take a little bit of the dough, we put it in aluminum foil, and we put it in the oven, and we say a blessing. This is what Jewish women do still today. My grandmother taught me this, but she taught me this without saying a blessing, just to take the dough and throw it in the back of the oven to burn. And this was taught as a family tradition. So when my mother gave me these earrings and she gave me this hamsa, I immediately remembered everything that my grandmother had taught me. And at that moment, I said, "Oh my gosh, I think that my grandmother's trying to tell me that we were from the Jews from the Inquisition," because there was no other explanation to me that I would have all of these traditions and now the tradition of the burial, and that my grandmother would be Catholic. So that was my big, let's say, epiphany on that morning, not even 24 hours after she had died.
So here you have an amazing epiphany, what I call it, that, a Jewish one, Jewish epiphany of your grandmother speaking to you from her grave, virtually giving you the sign that she was Jewish, something she'd never done in her life before. And you said that in your mind, it was leading you back to your own family tradition, going back to the Inquisition. And we have to tell our viewers here that the Inquisition you're talking about was the Spanish and the Portuguese Inquisition of the 15th century, in which the Roman Catholic Church were forcing Jews to either convert to Christianity or to die. There was a period of where they had an expulsion, where they first of all expelled the Jews and they scattered to North Africa and to Central and South America, even places like Cuba, for instance. But the Catholic Church pursued them there, and they had their own forms of inquisition even in Central and South America. But coming back to your story, so now I have to tell you also, the viewers, that again, in contrary to the Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition, the heritage of a Jew is passed not on the paternal side, the father's side, but on the maternal side, on the mother's side. So what Jenny's telling us up to now is she's getting a message yet to be confirmed that her grandmother is telling her that she was Jewish and her daughter was Gina's mother, and that she is the daughter of her mother, making 3 generations of Judaism on the maternal side. Take it from there, Jenny. Where do you go from here?
That is correct. So I knew that my grandmother and my grandfather were related, and I had been asking for the family tree from the time I was 14 years old. Not because of a Jewish connection. I've always just been extremely interested in my ancestry. So I had asked for the family tree, and I wouldn't get the family tree. Nobody would give it to me. So after that morning, and after I finally was having these thoughts, I went back to my mother and I said, please, do you have anything from the family at all? And she was, well, you think you're going to find a little note written in Hebrew and it's going to be hidden in a box. I said, Mom, I'm just asking for anything. Do you have a family tree? So she did come to my house with a little box that had the family tree that my grandfather, first cousin of my grandmother, had made going back to about 1790, and a lot of letters going back and forth to Spain. There was no indication anywhere that they were Jews. However, I did see from the family tree that my grandparents were first cousins, and their parents were first cousins, and their parents were first cousins. And in genealogy, we know this to be called a collapsed pedigree. And a collapsed pedigree is one where the family tree doesn't go up like a normal tree you see with all the branches. A collapsed pedigree, it keeps collapsing at every generation because it's the same family. So I started to pursue as much as I could on the internet on this family tree, trying to run after this story to see, because all of a sudden, in the whole time I was converting, it did not occur to me that I could have been a Jew all along. It wasn't like I converted because I thought, no, I converted from that burning desire inside. And then all of a sudden, upon this death, like the world opened to me. So it was impossible for me to get back on the internet past 1790. And this tree that my grandfather had left. So I hired a genealogist in Spain, and the genealogist, I didn't want to tell him I was looking for a Jewish lineage because there's still a lot of anti-Semitism in many countries in Europe, and I didn't want him to know that. So I just told him I wanted a maternal lineage direct. I said, I just want you to find the grandmothers. I don't want you to bother about the brothers. I don't want to hear about their husbands or their uncles. I just want to go back grandmother after grandmother. And he asked me, what are you looking for? And I said, just grandmothers. He said, are you looking for an inheritance? I said, yeah, I guess you could say I'm looking for an inheritance. Are you looking for some kind of royalty? I said, oh, you betcha I'm looking for royalty. And at the end, he said to me, are you looking for a Jewish maternal lineage? And found me out, and I said yes. He was very discouraging. The man that I hired was an ex-priest, and I hired him on purpose. I heard he was very good, but I didn't want somebody that was going to be a yes man, that was going to give me what I was looking for. I wanted somebody that would probably be the devil's advocate and buck me the whole way, and that was this gentleman. He was amazing. And he went back generation after generation, grandmother after grandmother. And I went back until about 1545 when the records got very difficult. But I was seeing that everybody was a cousin. No one had ever married outside of the family as a cousin, first cousin. Sometimes I was afraid that I would find that they were marrying their siblings. So it was really, I was also finding things like that that sometimes the babies that were born were not being baptized because they were too ill to go to the church. And I thought that was also very odd because nobody ever died, but that they were too ill to be baptized again and again and again in the records. And I was finding things like very long engagements that were being done when the girl was 12 years old, and things that were not really tradition, a Catholic tradition. And I had a lot of circumstantial evidence, but I didn't have the smoking gun that would lead me back to a Jewish woman. I had a lot of information, and I thought, you know what? I think I have enough. I have the traditions, I have the hamsa, I have the earrings, I have all these traditions inside these records. I have enough. So I packed everything up and I came to Israel, and I went to see the head of the conversion of the Beit Dins here in Israel. And he's looking at my family tree and a unbroken maternal lineage going back to 1545. And he was very impressed. This is amazing. And you've done such a great work of genealogy. And I understand all this circumstantial evidence. And everything is wonderful and dandy. But where is the Jewish woman in the tree? And as much as I tried to explain the circumstantial evidence and that my family had lived in the same village, including to my grandparents were born 500 years, they were living in this tiny village on the border between Spain and Portugal called Cooltv-se. And they lived there, which is why it also made it very simple, not simple, but less difficult for me to find all of these women in a row. So the rabbi said, listen, it's a wonderful tree and you've done an amazing job. By now, by the way, about 4 or 5 years had gone by. I had been working very hard on this. In the beginning, I started working on it because I wanted my children to be Jewish. And Jewish meaning I was not able to convert them. So if I could prove they were Jewish, it would be fantastic because I was so happy. I identify so much as being Jewish, and I'm so proud of being a Jew that I couldn't imagine that I couldn't give this to my children in the beginning. But as they started growing older and it became less relevant in their lives, I started doing it also for the people that started following me around on social media that wanted to do what I've done, that wanted to find their ancestors to be Jewish. There's many people out there. So the rabbi said to me, look, I cannot do anything for you unless you find me the Jewish woman. And I cannot do anything for you unless you find for me that in that village where your family lived for 500 years, if you can find that there was a Jewish settlement in that village, because I've checked, he told me he checked all the history books and he was right. There's nothing pointing to a Jewish settlement, and Jews don't live alone. So basically, I had to leave Israel with all my boxes and extremely disappointed.
Well, listen, I told you at the time, remember that the Jewish religion, they say about the Jews, we want to conquer the world and everything, but if you take the three main religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, Judaism is the only religion that makes it hard to almost impossible for anybody to convert into Judaism, unlike, as I say, Christianity and Islam. And here we have a story of Jenny, who goes back generations, 7 generations or more, and then the rabbinot are saying, fine, okay, you've traced your maternal family back to Spain, but you haven't proved to us there were Jews there at all. So this is how difficult it is often to convert into Judaism, and it has a more modern relevance, which I'll come to later. But Jenny, take it from there. So you go back to this town. Your family had lived for 500 years, and what did you find or not find there when you went back there?
So I was afraid to go back to the town, to be honest, because I had come so far. And once I left Israel, I started to I started even to cast doubts on my own soul, my own story, my own. It started to catch such doubts. I have to tell you that it was my husband who really just bought the tickets and said, "We're going to the town because whatever secrets are to be had have to be in that town. Otherwise, you're going to be finished and basta, and you're not going to go anywhere else." And I had come so far, and the tenacity to just get to where I was should have proved I was a Jew. But from birth, but that didn't happen. So we go back to the village, and as we're getting closer, we drove from Madrid and we went due west towards Portugal. And as we're getting closer in the car, the civilizations are dropping off and the towns are dropping off. And all of a sudden, all that you see in front of you are the villages on the other side of the river separating Spain from Portugal. So I thought to myself, you know what? I was not really able to find that my family was in the Inquisition of Spain, because what must have happened is that they traveled the same road I'm traveling, and their escape route was to Portugal. Because in fact, the Spanish Inquisition and expulsion was in 1492. But until 1496, there was free entry to Portugal. And I felt at that moment that they may have crossed over into Portugal and that perhaps I could find them in the Inquisition of Portugal. And I certainly had enough people on my tree already. So when I got to the village, I opened my computer. It was really a village so old. I mean, it was unbelievable. The same stones that my great, 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 great grandparents walked, I was walking. But from a modern point of view, I was able to open my computer, look online to some Inquisition archives, and on the spot, I was able to match my tree to a woman that had been burned at the stake in the Portuguese side. So I felt, wow, I cannot believe that in my head I was doing Spain, 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 not realizing that because of their diaspora and leaving on the day of the expulsion, they had gone into Portugal. So I had that part settled, and I was feeling somewhat better as I was coming into the village. But now I needed to prove, because the rabbis had put the additional the additional task of finding that there was a Jewish settlement. And if you remember from earlier in the story, I have been in pharmaceuticals all my life. I'm not a historian. I didn't particularly do well in history in school. So the reality is that all of a sudden it was to me to come and to find that there was Jewish history there. So I started walking into the village and asking everybody I knew, and not that I knew, that I came upon, it was very elderly. People were in like assisted living facilities. People were walking with walkers. They were walking with canes. It's a very high altitude village. You oversee Portugal from it. And it's a very old, the young people have left. Probably there's nothing to do there. And as I started asking, tell me about the Jews of the village. I was just, oh, there were never any Jews here. There were the Celts and there were the Visigoths and we had the Moors, but there weren't Jews. Person after person was telling me there were never any Jews there. But, I have come this far. I'm in this village and I'm not about to be discouraged, because I know that between me and the Rabbanut here in Israel is this village. So I was going to have to find it. Come hell or high water, I was going to have to find something there. So they tell me that the historian of the village is the caretaker of the church. So I went to the church door with my family tree, which had 8,000 people on it. And she's asking me, tell me the name of your family. I mean, she also started with, there were never any Jews here, and I don't know why you're looking for Jewish history, and we don't have any Jewish history. but tell me the name of your family. And I'm going through every name on that book, in that paper. Martinez and Alvarez, Gonzalez, Menendez, every single Spanish name is on my tree. And she's saying no and no and no. By now, I'm back to 15, whatever. And I remember that my grandfather on that family tree, in a little spidery handwriting on the top, he had written, Nos decían los bollicos, which means they called us bollicos. I had never paid attention to that, but at this point, it was a name, and I was running out of names. So I said to her, they called us bollicos. And she said, Bollico, why didn't you tell me before? Tomorrow I will show you the synagogue. I almost fell. What I really wanted to do was to smack her because I had been standing there for 2 hours. But I later learned that the word bollico is actually in Ladino and it means little bread. So it could be at some point, perhaps the family was a family of bakers. I never learned why bollico, but apparently it was the key word to open up. And I can't, it still gives me goosebumps to think that my grandfather on that family tree, he gave me the key to open up this whole story, because if I had not said Boyico, I would have had to walk away from that village with nothing. So the next morning, we go to, in the middle of the town, we go to a place that has an arch, and she tells me, this is the oral tradition that this is the original arch of the synagogue that was in the village. And it is the tradition that this was where the rabbi lived and that the services were held on the side. So we go inside the house, and it was a very nice lady, and she's very old, and she's telling me how she lived there 50 years, and she remade the house, and she redid the house, and everything is new. I didn't want to hear that because I didn't need everything to be new. I needed something to be 500 years old. So it was a beautiful house, and everything was very nice. However, on our way out, I still had not found anything, and I saw to the right there was a garage, and I said, "Can I see your garage?" And she said, "No, I've never fixed the garage." I said, "Please, please, let me see the garage." As I said, that village and this house and everything happening there was what was standing in my way. So I was going to be a bulldozer no matter what. So she opens the door, and I see a baby gate around a hole in the ground. And I said, "I want to go down." "No, no, that's where I keep my wine." I pulled off the baby gate. I felt really bad because, this woman has since died. She was quite elderly. And I think I was quite like Bruce, let's say, but it was going to get done. So I went down, and I noticed that I went down into a rectangular room that had a spout coming into it. And that spout was soft as butter, even though it was made of granite. And I realized that I must have been standing in the mikvah of the synagogue. And I took pictures. Then I went outside. I found somebody else. I took pictures all over the village because, as I said, I'm not a historian. So I took pictures right and left and everywhere else. And I couldn't get anything done over there except pictures of anything. On my cell phone, I pulled up pictures of a menorah. I pulled up pictures of Hebrew letters, pictures of a Hansa, pictures of just Jewish articles, a Star of David, different things. And I said, I would take my phone. "Have you seen this? Do you see this? Do you know this? Have you seen this?" And so I took pictures and pictures and pictures. And I came back to Miami, and I started sending emails around the world to the Biblical Archaeology magazine, to Bar-Ilan University, to Notre Dame, Oxford, anywhere that they had done any kind of excavations for antique mikvot, anything. I found what I thought was like a mikvah in the middle of the city. It had the 7 steps in the village. 7 steps, the water was clear, so it was running clear water. And I took everything. And the only person that answered me was a gentleman in the Galilee. And he told me that the secret to those villages can only be seen in the walls with the sun of 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So now I'm back in Miami and I'm being told that the secrets are in the walls with the sun of 2 o'clock, which is why the pictures were like not so great. So, of course, it entailed me to have to go back to the village. I'm 3,000 miles away. It's a different country. But by now, believe me, I was not giving up. I had come way too far. So this time, I gather up a group of historians from Madrid, a lot of cameras, a lot of information, and I go back to the village. And this time, I see a gentleman, very elderly, has also since died. And he said to me, "What are you looking for?" He said, "I was the mayor 50 years ago." I said, "I'm looking for Jewish traces in a synagogue." He said, "Oh, let me show you the synagogue." I said, "No, no, no. I've seen the synagogue." He said, "No. What is your family name?" By now I knew, forget it. The only family name was Boyico. So I said, "We were Boyico." He said, "You're a descendant of the Boyicos?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "We have been waiting for you." He knocks on a door very close. I mean, unbelievable coincidence. We were like right up the hill and he's struggling and he knocks and he said, "Open the synagogue." It's a whole different building. "There's a descendant of Uncle Boyico here." Meanwhile, I'm being followed by all these historians. I'm being followed by video. I'm being followed by camera. It was amazing. And they opened the door, and you could see the house split where the kitchen had underneath had like stairs going down. And I started going down the stairs, and it was incredible. It was, I think the first building had been a synagogue before the Inquisition. It was on top of the city. It was everything, but here everything was underground. And at that moment, when I stepped and there was cockroaches everywhere and people were taking pictures, all I could do was cry. I could see that there was like a sort of Aron Kodesh that was on the side with a shelf. An Aron Kodesh is where, when we pray in the Jewish religion, where we will keep our Torahs. So this is like on a shelf. And there was a separate section with a separate door, which was probably for the women. And to think that my family had been brought to that, to have to worship underground, and that I had been brought to that, to have to prove that my family was Jewish, that I had to go through so much. And however, the tears were more for having been able to recuperate that one day lost to Jewish history of my family and so many families like mine that are around the world. So I picked up all those, the historians, they all agreed that was an underground synagogue. The mikvah under the lady's house was a mikvah. The mikvah in the village was a mikvah. And they certified all this for me. I took all of this back to Israel. By now, I had been at this for 10 years. And I took everything back to Israel. It was all in English with all the pictures, all the information. And it was 2 years more when they translated all of this into Hebrew. And I finally got a letter from the rabbi, the chief rabbi of the Beit Din Gadol, which is the highest Jewish court in Jerusalem, stating that God had come to me in a very roundabout way, but that from that moment on, no one could ever question that I was Jewish, and anyone that descended from me or ascended from me on the maternal lineage would be Jewish. And it was a long road.
Wow, wow. You know, viewers, I hear so many stories because I'm involved in the Institute for Anusim Studies. The Anusim are the Jews of Spain and Portugal at the Netanya Academic College. And a lot of people are questioning the strange customs, as Jenny mentioned earlier. We'll talk a little bit that's going on their families, and suddenly discovering that they have Jewish blood in their veins. going back centuries, back to Portugal or to Spain. And the expulsion and those that didn't manage to escape were either forcibly converted to Christianity, or were executed. And it took somebody with the strange experience of Jenny Milgrom and the extraordinary determination of Jenny Milgrom to find her own heritage, that we have a story that's relevant to a lot of people. And Jenny, you've repeated this story in your book, My 15 Grandmothers. Tell us about the book. And it doesn't end at 15 grandmothers. It goes back further than 15 grandmothers.
Correct. So when I first wrote the book was in 2012. It was right when I had the 15 grandmothers, and I had found the proof in Portugal. But the reality is that as I went back, I wrote my 15 grandmothers in Spanish as well, and it's called Mis 15 Abuelas. Both books are available on Amazon, and these were written some time ago. As I started becoming so active in the social media world in general, speaking around the world about this. As a matter of fact, I did speak at the Knesset caucus that Barry had planned here. Barry, maybe you want to talk a little bit about that when we did that years ago?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, Jenny, my involvement in this, I think you know this as well. This is where I come into it sort of personally. My story is a strange one because years ago I was involved in real estate, but I was also involved in speaking up and doing things to explain the Israel position, because we were getting a lot of, as we do today, even more so, a lot of antagonistic and fraudulent allegations put against our country. And I was at real estate and I was having coffee with a client of mine from England, and he said to me, you know, look, Barry, where's the next great aliyah? That's the wave of Jews who come to Israel. He says, you've had the aliyah for the Yemenite Jews, and you've had the Ethiopian Jews, and you've had the Russian Jews, so where's the next great aliyah coming from? And I said, the next great aliyah, the next great wave of immigration into Israel are going to be the secret Jews. What the heck is the secret Jews? I said, it's the Jews who, even at this time, may not yet be aware that they're Jewish, but they are the inheritors of the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition, which was a Holocaust on the Jews that equated at the time with the same Holocaust from Nazi Germany, where people had to be converted to Catholicism or die. And a lot of people were forcibly converted to Catholicism, but as Jenny was explaining, secretly kept their Jewish traditions, strange family habits like lighting candles on a Friday or washing your hands before a meal, strange customs that, like Jenny mentioned. These days, these people don't know that they're Jewish customs. But there's an awakening, and with, as Jenny at the time really didn't have it because it was on just beginning, but with the development of the internet, people are inquiring and they're contacting, for instance, I mentioned the Institute for Strategic Studies at Latanya Academic College, saying my name is this, and we have these strange customs. You know, is there anything Jewish in my heritage? And they're beginning to reconnect to their Jewish roots. And the final thing I have to say on this is that which caused me to initiate this Knesset caucus, what's called the Anusim, is because if you suddenly discover you have Jewish roots and you're living in Central or South America without a Jew around you for thousands of miles, if you want to return to your Judaism, you have to do it basically in a Jewish surrounding, and there's no better Jewish surrounding than Israel. So my reason for creating the Knesset caucus was to do three things. First of all, the ones who really wanted to convert to Judaism, as Jenny has so eloquently explained, the biggest obstacle in their roots are the rabbinot. It's the office of the chief rabbis, who say, fine, we don't accept converts. You have to really convince us that you have Jewish roots going back generations and prove it. And not everybody has the determination of Jenny Milgrom. That's one. Once also you want to come to Israel to do your conversion, you need to be allowed into the country. So you need the interior minister to approve your permission to come into the country for any period of time to go through the conversion process. That's the second obstacle. But the third thing is, my opinion, that even if you don't want to return to Judaism, but you discover you have some Jewish blood in your vein, you suddenly have a different perspective on world events and the world in general. And when you hear about the Jewish state being denigrated in your own country or anywhere, you maybe have a sort of an affinity to that Jewish state. For being aware you have certain amounts of Jewish blood in your vein. And that was the reason, the three main pillars that caused me to initiate the Knesset in the Caucasus, because we needed the help of the members of the Knesset in the Israeli parliament to put pressure on the rabbinot to allow people who want to convert to do so, to have a fast path, if you want, especially if they can retrace their roots back to Spain and Portugal, which is basically what Jenny has done. And Jenny, come back into the picture here, because coming full circle today, what is your involvement in this process?
So right now, so after I wrote these books, which I thought would help, there was a book I also wrote called How I Found My 15 Grandmothers in Spanish and English to help people to do a little bit of what I had done, because it was so incredibly difficult. But I also realized that it wasn't just the difficulty of finding the actual paperwork, even though that was incredibly difficult. It was also the difficulty of what do you do after you find it? In Central and South America, there are no Beit Dins. And the only Beit Dins are in the United States. So in that part of the world. So there are organizations here in Israel, like Shavei Israel, and another one, Or Torah Stone, that takes rabbis and does conversions there. I'm involved in an organization called Kulanu, that I'm on their board, that we reach out. I take care of the Anusim. And many times it's not like we are bringing these people back to conversion. What we're bringing these people is to awareness, because they're already feeling it like I felt it. And we're bringing them so that, like you said, Barry, if they feel that they have a connection to a Jewish ancestor, then they will feel that they are friends to the Jewish people, and they will feel that they are friends to the nation of Israel. And I think that this is such an incredible, important mission, to have people be friendly. As we know, Jews need friends, Israel needs friends, and the more that we can do this throughout Latin America, where a lot of these Anusim are, then it's a better job that we're doing around the world.
I agree with you that you and I are on the same wave here, because I'll give you a new perspective, by the way. We are now, and I'm speaking about myself and the Institute for Nursing Studies, are about to approach the Jewish agency that has a new leader, it's I've heard so, for the Jewish agency to adopt the Anusim and the help with regard to their aliyah into Israel and the conversion process, making the Anusim a new project of the Jewish agency. And if anybody out there really is interested in finding out more information about their roots or any inquiries about that, you can contact me at theviewfromisrael@gmail.com, or search for the Institute for the Anusim Studies at Netanya Academic College. They have a staff there, they have archives, they'd be interested in answering any of your inquiries. I think this has been an incredible story of an incredible lady, Jenny. Jenny, to finish off, where again can people get your book?
You can get my book. I've also recently written my 15 Grandmothers, How I Found My 15 Grandmothers. I wrote another book called Pyre to Fire, which follows the complete story of my family that I found in the archives. And the newest one published in Israel called The Recipes of My 15 Grandmothers, were recipes that my mother had hidden in the house that I found recently. So all of these books are available on Amazon, and the recipes are available if you're in Israel on the Geffen Publishing website.
Wow. Thank you, Jenny, for being on and sharing your amazing story. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Well,
Thanks.
that was Jenny Milgrom with her amazing story on The View from Israel. Thanks for being with us. Look forward to seeing you again soon.